Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar named Survivors First, Building a Society Free from Prostitution, organized on the occasion of the International Day of No Prostitution. Before starting the webinar, please know that we will have a Q&A session towards the end. So if you have a question, please write it in the Q&A section, so starting by saying for who is your question. And then I will gather your questions and ask them to our guests when the time dedicated to questions starts. So thank you very much in advance for respecting this. I will first give the floor to Viviane Teitelbaum, EWL Vice President, for a few introductory words. Viviane, the floor is yours.
Sorry, here. So hello, everyone. Thank you, Alexia. And welcome at this webinar that, at EWL and all the members organization of the Brussels Call, we are clear prostitution should never be trivialized by labeling it as sex work. And why? Because such an attempt to normalize and even sanitize are inherently exploitative practices that at its core is a form of violence. So prostitution, I think here, most of us agree, perpetuates harm by feeding off multiple layers of systemic inequalities. And those inequalities are deeply rooted in exploitation, gender discrimination, economic vulnerability, ethnicity, age, and of course, the precarious situation of the migration status. And I should probably start with that because there is a real missing link between trafficking and prostitution that exists for many politicians who try to disassemble that and look the other way. When we are talking about trafficking, they try not to talk about prostitution. And at its heart, prostitution is not an expression of free choice, but often it's born from limited life choices and coercion. So most, or should I say, nearly all women are driven to prostitution, not out of a genuine sense of choice, but due to circumstances such as economic hardship, coercion, or trafficking. So this reality is really stark. Women and girls are disproportionately, and we put it there as an introduction, but they are disproportionately impacted by prostitution. And statistics show that, and I want to remind that as an introduction because it's huge, and we need to really be conscious of that. Around 90% of individuals in prostitution are women, while approximately 97% of the so-called buyers of sexual acts are men. And this imbalance underscores, of course, the inherent power dynamics that sustain prostitution. And it's a system driven by male demand, a demand that commodifies women's bodies, reducing them to objects that can be purchased and discarded. By framing prostitution as sex work, they purposely blur these power imbalances and the violence that's inherent in the transaction. And that language normalizes the notion that some people, primarily women and girls, exist for the sexual consumption of other, mostly, primarily men. So prostitution is intrinsically tied to systemic inequality, poverty, vulnerability. Poverty because limited access to education, lack of employment opportunities, other socioeconomic disadvantages can create the perfect storm that will push many into the sex trade. For marginalized groups, such as migrants, racial and ethnic minorities, these factors are often exacerbated, further entrenching them in cycles of exploitation. The narrative that prostitution is simply a job like any other ignores and the significant harm experienced by those within it. Emotional, psychological, physical trauma are prevalent among individuals involved in prostitution. And the exploitation they face is often dehumanizing, leaving deep, lasting scars. Equating prostitution to a legitimate form of work, of course, undermine the efforts to address this sorry, I have a cold, not easy to speak, systemic violence that underpins it. And it diverts the attention from the root causes, gender inequality, poverty, lack of opportunity, and legitimizes the idea that some people's bodies are inherently commodities. Moreover, and I will not be much longer, the existence of prostitution is fundamentally incompatible with the pursuit of equality between men and women. Genuine gender equality cannot be realized in a society that will allow women's bodies to be bought and sold. Prostitution upholds the belief that men are entitled to access women's bodies, reinforcing the harmful stereotypes about male dominance, female subordination, and this entitlement fosters a culture in which the sexual autonomy of women is undermined and their bodies are seen as existing for the pleasure of men. If we aspire to true sexual freedom and equality, we must challenge and dismantle the system of prostitution. Sexual freedom must be based on mutual respect, equality, genuine consent, not on financial coercion or power imbalance. And as long as prostitution exists, these ideals will remain out of reach for many women. True freedom cannot coexist with a system that capitalizes on the vulnerabilities of others, nor can it thrive when one's sex or gender is consistently placed in a position of exploitation for the benefit of another. And the normalization of prostitution as sex work is deeply problematic and counterproductive. It also serves to obscure the violence and coercion in prostitution, deflecting the attention away from the needs to address the underlying systemic issues that force individuals into those situations. And so, to conclude, what I want to say is that it's essential to confront the realities head on and work towards a society where no one is pushed into prostitution as a result of systemic inequality, and where the idea of purchasing access to someone's body in fact becomes socially unacceptable. Ending demand, ending prostitution, it's not just about protecting individuals from violence and exploitation, and that's already huge. It's also about fostering a world where equality, respect, and genuine freedom are the norm for everyone, regardless of sex or gender. So with this webinar, we will gather survivors, women's rights organizations, and I will give back the floor to Alexia to see how it will go on from here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this important introduction, Viviane. And of course, we know you have other commitments after, so you stay as long as you can and you want. And also, please take care of yourself.
I'm sorry.
No problem. We are going to start now with the first panel dedicated to the reality of prostitution and how to concretely support survivors of prostitution. I am going to give the floor now to Mary Merklinger, survivor from Germany. Since she exceeded prostitution, she is an international speaker and helps to educate about the harms of prostitution on the individual and on the social level. Among others, she spoke at the European Parliament, but also in Greece, Malta, UK, Mexico, and Italy. Mary, thank you very much for being with us today and for keeping on sharing your story. The floor is yours. I think we cannot hear you. Voila.
Now you can hear me. Okay. Thank you for having me. Hello to everyone. Nice to see you. A lot of what I wanted to say is already said, and that's great. But I miss one thing with the root causes. It's classism. That plays a huge role in prostitution. You know, the financial and class inequality. And I really think we have to think about this, because that makes women exploitable, because they do not have the financial resources to feed their children. And if you go to the poorer countries and the poorest countries of Europe, it is much more pressure to fix the situation. And then we come to the classism part of lack of education, which is part of racism, systemic racism, and of course, sexism. And the title of the webinar is The Reality of Prostitution and How to Concretely Support Survivors. How to concretely support its individual. The experience is always traumatizing. I know women who have been in prostitution for 2 months, 20 years ago, and still suffer from what they experienced and what it has done to them. I want my wish for concretely support of survivors is that they get the individual support they need, not only the basic support, what people and what NGOs can do is to give basic support. That means a way to the social system. That's how it works in Germany. And that means just a job, and mostly jobs which are not well paid, and jobs that doesn't help anything. The woman is in the same situation as she has been when she entered prostitution. She's in poverty. She cannot make ends meet. It's desperate, you know. So what I want to have for survivors is unlimited support, timely, unlimited support to life, which gives them self-worth, a feeling of self-worth, of I'm missing the words in English, I'm sorry, but it's so important to build up this this self-consciousness, this the strength to fight the stigma, because the stigma is deeply, deeply in the minds of survivors, you know. That's the worst stigma, is the stigma we have in our heads. And to fight this stigma, women need work which has a value, you know, even if it's to create something beautiful, to create something nice, not only cleaning hotel rooms, not only working in the lowest jobs. We owe them, we as a society who made it possible to let them be abused, we owe them education, we owe them everything they missed in the story before, you know, the root causes. So I think to concretely support survivors, it takes a lot of time and a lot of money to break it down, you know, and nobody wants to afford this. It's only basic support that can be given. And I think that's very hard. And yeah, to fight classism, racism, and sexism will help that not so many women will enter prostitution, you know. If we have an equal Europe, not only equal with racism, with classism, the same, you know. Right at the moment, the rich countries are abusing and using the poorest countries. And that's exactly the same what happens in prostitution. The women from the poorest countries are abused. The time Greece had a lot of problems to pay back to the European Union, suddenly, you never seen before a woman from Greece in German brothels. Greek women show up in German brothels. Right at the moment, Ukrainian women are showing up in German brothels. So you always can see where the inequality is and where the people are suffering. And women want to fix the situation. So they do what they can do. So they come to Germany to a brothel to get the money for their families home in Greece or in Ukraine or however, wherever. So yeah, and it takes a long time. It takes a long time to support survivors. My exiting, in fact, took about 10 years. It took about 10 years of getting education, getting enough enough yeah to know more about my skills and sell them and get a job, a well-paid job and a fulfilling job. So I say it's not only exiting, it's arriving, arriving in a life that's worth to live and where you allow yourself to have dreams. And the most women in prostitution, even especially when they got in prostitution very young, like the women from Eastern Europe, they need to learn how to live. They need to learn how to have a normal life and to have people who think, yeah, you can do something, you have skills, and you can build your skills as you have and as you need and as you want. And that's the support I think is needed for survivors. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing this with us, Mary. And what I take with me out of your speech is that indeed we shouldn't just give means for survivors to barely survive. Survivors have the right to dreams and they have the right to joy. So thank you again, Mary, for sharing that. I am now going to give the floor to another survivor, Pascale Rouges. She is a survivor from Belgium. She will deliver her testimony in French, and I will be translating this testimony right after. Alors, Pascale, je vais vous donner la parole. Je vous laisse faire votre témoignage en français et puis je traduirai juste après en anglais. Merci beaucoup d'être ici avec nous aujourd'hui.
Bonjour à tous. Voilà, en fait, d'abord, je voudrais quand même m'excuser de parler en français, mais pour moi, c'est tellement important et tellement difficile à dire dans une autre langue que ma langue maternelle. Donc, je suis désolée, mais effectivement, je préfère laisser quelqu'un d'autre traduire derrière parce que le dire en anglais serait pour moi trop difficile. Et je préfère être bien comprise plutôt que de dire des choses qui ne seraient pas exactes par rapport à ma pensée. Alors voilà, donc moi je suis une survivante, ça fait plus de 20 ans, ça fait même 25 ans que j'ai quitté la prostitution. Mais comme le disait ma collègue Marie juste avant moi, effectivement les cicatrices restent après, même après autant d'années. Donc déjà pour vous expliquer en quelques mots, je fais partie en fait de celle qui est encore donc dans l'ancienne génération où je suis tombée amoureuse en fait de mon proxénète, qui est devenu ensuite mon mari et le père de mes enfants. Et disons que moi, ce qui m'a permis en fait d'arrêter la prostitution et de me réveiller par rapport à ce que je vivais, c'est le fait que mon mari m'avait dit, puisque mes enfants étant des filles, alors qu'elles étaient encore tout bébés, il m'a dit un jour que si plus tard elles voulaient se prostituer, il ne les en empêcherait pas, au contraire, il les aiderait. Et c'est là que chez moi le déclic s'est produit parce que je me suis immédiatement dit que effectivement ce que moi je vivais, il était exclu de faire vivre ça à mes propres filles, à mes enfants. Et d'ailleurs, en fait, je me suis rendu compte que c'est exclu en fait pratiquement de faire vivre ça à n'importe quelle fille pour moi. Donc voilà, et c'est là en fait que j'ai eu le déclic d'en sortir, de tout faire pour me battre pour le quitter et emmener mes filles très très loin de lui. Hélas, c'était en même temps son arme, c'était mes enfants. évidemment, puisqu'ils me les ont enlevés à plusieurs reprises pour me forcer à revenir. Et c'est encore le genre de situation qui existe encore à l'heure actuelle. Il faut dire, à l'époque, en fait, on appelait ça de toute façon un proxénète. Hélas, la société bien pensante à l'heure actuelle a décidé de donner un joli petit nom à ces gens. On les appelle maintenant des lover boys. Mais en réalité, c'est toujours des proxénètes. C'est toujours la même chose, ce sont toujours les mêmes. Je voudrais quand même attirer l'attention sur le fait qu'il ne faut pas oublier que cette tranche-là existe toujours et que cela s'adresse à nos jeunes filles, surtout sur les réseaux sociaux en ce moment. C'est le genre de choses qu'on a tendance à oublier, mais les réseaux sociaux sont un énorme danger pour nos jeunes filles parce que ces fameux lover boys, donc ces proxénètes, sont sur les réseaux sociaux et attirent nos jeunes filles, souvent très très jeunes, pour les pousser en fait à se prostituer, toujours avec les mêmes outils, toujours en les faisant tomber amoureuses, en leur faisant des cadeaux au début, etc., en étant très très gentils, pour qu'après ça se retourne contre elles et qu'on commence à les manipuler, si pas à les battre ou à les droguer, mais de toute façon, après, toujours pour les amener dans la prostitution. Donc, en fait, le danger est également présent là-dessus. Et donc, pour moi, c'est quelque chose sur lequel il faut qu'on continue à se battre aussi, parce que disons, en fait, la société a tendance à fermer les yeux là-dessus, parce qu'effectivement, c'est trop proche de nous. Et quand c'est très proche de nous, on ferme les yeux parce qu'on se dit, oui, mais ça n'arrive qu'aux autres. Et moi, j'ai toujours tendance à dire, attention, ça n'arrive pas qu'aux autres. Parce que moi, j'étais éduquée, je suis allée à l'école, j'ai fait enfin, je n'ai pas fait des grandes études, bien sûr, mais malgré tout, j'étais éduquée, j'étais une jeune fille bien. Donc, voilà, je suis tombée dans le panneau aussi. Et il y a plein de jeunes filles bien qui tombent encore toujours dans le panneau tous les jours. Donc, voilà. Alors, en tant que survivante maintenant, ce que je voudrais aussi relever, c'est un combat que je mène depuis plus de 20 ans et qui n'a toujours pas abouti, c'est l'amnistie fiscale pour les jeunes femmes qui veulent sortir de la prostitution. Parce que encore toujours à l'heure actuelle, l'État peut revenir vers ces jeunes femmes parce que du moment qu'il est écrit quelque part dans un jugement, au tribunal, par exemple pour une demande de divorce ou n'importe quoi, du moment qu'on a inscrit quelque part que cette jeune femme s'est prostituée, l'État peut revenir en lui demandant des arriérés de loi sociale et des arriérés de contribution sur ce qu'elle a gagné pendant 3 ans en arrière. Et là, c'est le genre de choses qui en plus peut faire replonger. Parce qu'on a beau, donc en fait, on s'est battu pour essayer d'en sortir, pour en sortir nos enfants, etc., et pour les protéger. Et le jour où ça nous arrive, eh ben, je peux vous assurer, moi, quand on est revenu avec 3 ans d'arriérés, à me réclamer 3 ans d'arriérés de contributions qui ont été calculées au prorata de ce qu'ils avaient estimé que j'avais pu gagner en 3 ans, plus 3 ans d'arriérés de loi sociale en tant qu'indépendante, ben, je peux vous assurer que je me suis demandé si j'allais pas y retourner pour pouvoir payer justement tous ces arriérés. Et donc, parce que c'était la seule solution que je voyais à ce moment-là. Et j'en connais beaucoup qui sont retournés à cause de ça aussi, justement, parce que ces arriérés leur étaient réclamés et que de ce fait, elles se retrouvaient face à un mur énorme avec des sommes incroyables à devoir payer. On parle de centaines de milliers d'euros. Ben, à ce moment-là, qu'est-ce que vous voulez? Vous dites, je n'ai pas d'autre solution, je suis presque obligée de retourner parce que c'est le seul moyen de gagner de l'argent pour pouvoir payer ce genre de choses. Donc ça, c'est un des combats que je voudrais qu'on continue à mener, c'est l'amnistie fiscale pour toute personne qui tente de sortir de la prostitution. Parce que ça ne peut pas arriver, parce que là, on parle pratiquement de proxénétisme de l'État. Je suis désolée, je ne peux pas dire autrement. Pour moi, c'est l'État qui devient le proxénète là, dans l'histoire, en osant réclamer ce genre de choses. Et comme le disait ma collègue Marie auparavant, effectivement, et c'est aussi un des combats que je voudrais mener, c'est d'essayer effectivement donc de proposer des parcours de sortie qui soit plus intéressant pour ces jeunes femmes. Parce qu'effectivement, quand on leur propose d'aller faire le ménage ou quoi que ce soit, où elles vont gagner 3 francs 6 sous, déjà, par rapport à ce qu'elles peuvent gagner tous les jours, elles se disent, oh, pardon, ça n'en vaudra pas la peine. Donc, on les décourage à l'avance. Et en plus, comme ce n'est pas valorisant, mais voilà, elles n'ont pas envie. Moi, je l'ai fait et je peux vous assurer que c'est dur. C'est très, très dur d'aller tous les jours travailler en se disant, mon Dieu, faire tout ça pour ça. Donc, j'ai eu la chance après de pouvoir regrimper les échelons de la société parce que, comme je vous disais, j'ai été éduquée, donc j'avais quand même des bonnes bases. Donc, j'ai petit à petit regrimpé les échelons de la société, mais c'est très dur. Donc, c'est pour ça qu'en fait, il vaut mieux proposer, je ne sais pas moi, des formations. À l'heure actuelle, il y a tellement de possibilités avec les formations en informatique ou n'importe quoi. Il y a des choses valorisantes, il y a plein de choses valorisantes qu'on peut proposer plutôt que de simplement proposer des places de tickets service, etc. Arrêtons de repartir dans les clichés. Elles en ont bien assez des clichés collés sur la peau. Euh, n'allons pas tomber là-dedans encore en plus. On ne fait qu'empirer les choses. Parce que, en plus, effectivement, elles vont avoir besoin de gagner leur vie aussi pour pouvoir, par exemple, se payer des psys, etc. Parce que tout ça, la société ne le propose pas non plus. Elles ont besoin de soutien psychologique et, enfin, quand elles en trouveront, parce que malgré tout, ce n'est pas toujours facile non plus à trouver, parce que le jugement se trouve là souvent aussi. Donc, voilà. Parce que de toute façon, comme on le disait, les cicatrices, elles vont rester, elles restent parfois, enfin, non, je vais dire, elles restent toujours. Comme je dis, depuis 25 ans, mes cicatrices, elles sont là et on m'enterrera avec. Je suis toujours très fragile et je sais que je peux très facilement retomber dans une dépression. Et j'ai tenté d'avoir un couple. Je suis tombée sur quelqu'un de merveilleux qui a accepté mon passé, qui ne m'a jamais jugé ni quoi que ce soit. Mais c'est moi, en fait, qui, sans vouloir, ai mis à mal mon couple parce que, ben, voilà, vous savez, toutes les femmes connaissent ce jour où elles n'ont pas envie, où leur mari commence à les caresser, que vous dites, non, ce soir, j'ai pas envie, je suis désolée, qu'il insiste un petit peu. Pour vous, si vous n'avez pas connu la prostitution, ça reste, bon, voilà, c'est un moment gênant, point. Pour nous qui nous sommes prostituées, on a ce retour en arrière, on se retrouve avec un flashback où en fait on se retrouve tout d'un coup avec cette sensation de se retrouver de nouveau avec un client, alors que c'est notre compagnon qui est à côté de nous. Et ça nous glace le sang au moment où ça nous arrive. Et je peux vous assurer que là, votre compagnon, il le sent. Et ça fait exploser cette belle bulle que vous vous étiez construite. Moi, cette belle bulle, elle a duré pendant plus de 10 ans, mais elle a explosé. Parce que, voilà, une fois que c'est arrivé, il n'y a plus de retour en arrière possible. Donc, se reconstruire, oui, on y arrive de certaines manières, mais comme on le disait, voilà, il y a des cicatrices qui restent et des douleurs qui restent et auxquelles on ne peut rien faire, en fait. Et c'est là où je peux dire qu'effectivement, ce n'est pas un métier comme un autre, parce qu'il n'y a aucun autre métier qui vous détruit à ce point-là. Au point que même 25 ans plus tard, vous êtes dans l'incapacité de vivre ce que tout un chacun peut vivre en toute tranquillité. Donc voilà, c'est le genre de message que je voulais passer. Donc s'il vous plaît, il faut continuer à se battre et surtout au point de vue européen, je pense qu'au niveau européen, je pense que maintenant le combat doit passer à un niveau supérieur où on puisse établir des législations qui empêchent les pays comme la Belgique de revenir en arrière comme on l'a fait il y a 2 ans maintenant et de légaliser la prostitution, d'en faire un métier parce que ça n'en est pas un. Et donc, je pense que le seul moyen, en fait, qu'on a encore, les seules armes qu'on pourrait avoir, ce serait maintenant qu'au niveau européen, on arrive à établir des réglementations qui fassent que les pays soient obligés d'aller de l'avant pour justement combattre la prostitution et non pas la légaliser. Donc voilà, ça c'est un message personnel, disons, c'est une idée qui m'est venue. Voilà.
Merci beaucoup, Pascal, pour ce témoignage bouleversant. Je vais essayer de retranscrire un maximum en anglais. J'ai pris des notes et j'espère vraiment pouvoir être fidèle à votre récit. Mais merci encore pour ce témoignage.
Avec plaisir.
So now I'm going to translate what Pascale shared with us. So she wanted first to apologize as she couldn't share her testimony in English because she wanted to use her native language to make sure that she could be properly understood and that she could say really what she went through. So it's been more than 25 years now that Pascale has exited prostitution, but the hurt stayed the same even after all these years. What happened to Pascale is that she fell in love with her pimp, who became her husband and the father of her children. And the day she decided that it was time for her to exit prostitution was the day her husband said about their daughters that if one day their daughters would like to be in prostitution, he wouldn't discourage them. On the contrary, he would push them to go into that direction. He would help them to be in prostitution. This has been a trigger for Pascale, and this is how she decided it was time really to exit prostitution. She took, of course, her daughters with her, but several times he used the daughters to make her come back, unfortunately. And nowadays we use a lot the wording and the vocabulary lover boys, but we must still have in mind that we're talking about pimps. And nowadays with social media, there is a huge danger for especially teenagers because they are forced through social media to go into prostitution. These so-called lover boys who are once again pimps, we shouldn't glamorize what it is about. They start by being kind, by offering gifts, but in the end, they push them in prostitution, they beat them, they even forced them to take drugs, etc. Unfortunately, it looks like society tends to close eyes on this because we want to think that it happens only to others, but this is not the case. And unfortunately, even teenagers from good backgrounds or well-educated, they are also falling into this trap sometimes. So for 20 years, also another point Pascale wanted to insist on is that for 20 years, she fights for survivors of prostitution not having to pay back any money to the tax administration. Because unfortunately, there is a system that allows the states now to, as long as they know that a person was in prostitution, the states can ask for money and up to 3 years money of the so-called activity. And this is not possible because it's a lot of money for survivors of prostitution. And this kind of request even push survivors of prostitution to go back in prostitution. And this is what she said it's a kind of state being the pimp in this case because of this demand of money of prostitution. Well, they push survivors sometimes to even go back because, of course, survivors cannot allow themselves to have such an amount of money to give back to the state. And another fight that is important for Pascale is to have better exit strategies and better exit strategies, more interesting for survivors, because it's not okay, and this is what Mary was saying as well, it's not okay to just offer them to be working in cleaning services after they exit prostitution. It's not a lot of money, and it's not a dream necessarily. So of course, nowadays we have plenty of possibilities, whether it is in informatics or in other fields, and we deserve to give survivors the chance to see their worth, their values, and they need to be recognized by society. Also knowing that survivors need psychological support, because this is once again a hurt that they keep throughout their life, and they need therapy and support throughout their whole life, because they can, unfortunately, for example, fall back in depression. Pascale also shared a very personal story. She shared the fact that she met someone once she exited prostitution. She was with this man for several years. It was a beautiful relationship until she had a flashback, because he was insisting on having a sexual relationship, and it reminded her of a client. And because of this flashback, of course, this destroyed her story, and they broke up, because once again, this is a hurt that you can never forget, and this flashback was very, very painful. So she insisted. She ended by saying that this is not a work, this is not a profession, and she hopes that at the European level we can push for regulation, abolitionist regulation, obliging member states to combat prostitution instead of legalizing it. So yeah, voilà Pascale, j'ai essayé de traduire, j'espère que c'était fidèle.
Oui, tout à fait, merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much. Thank you again, Pascale. And now I'm going to welcome Héma Sibi, a feminist advocate and jurist specialized in human rights. She is an advocacy coordinator of the Coalition for the Abolition of Prostitution, and she has authored the research Last Girl First, Prostitution at the Intersection of Sex, Race, and Class-Based Oppressions. Among others, she's here today to talk about the new guide published by the Coalition for the Abolition of Prostitution, a handbook that gathers best practice of grassroots and survivor-led organizations, providing direct assistance to persons in prostitution around the world. Welcome, Héma.
Hi, welcome. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, the European Women's Lobby. Hello, everybody. I'm thrilled to be here today to discuss the best practices to support women and girls in prostitution. I first want to start by thanking Pascale and Marie for their very powerful speech, and I'm very happy to represent the civil society and the grassroots organization that work with persons in prostitution, because after what they just delivered, it makes sense to understand the full approach of abolitionist organizations that support persons in prostitution on the ground. So first of all, just to tell you and to highlight that the field experiences of the members of CAP, we have 35 member organizations in 28 countries. All of them provide support to 17,000 persons in prostitution, victims of trafficking for sexual exploitation. And their field experiences allow us to draw a couple of lessons on prostitution, as it was mentioned just now. The first one, of course, is that prostitution is a form of male violence against women. The overwhelming majority of persons exploited in the sex trade are women and girls, while the overwhelming majority of those that exploit them and that purchase them are men. Survivors of prostitution testify about how the repetition of sexual acts that are not desired, but that are lived as a consequence of a socioeconomic, physical, or psychological constraint is in and of itself a violence. Surrounding this main violence are the others, the rapes, the beatings, the physical assaults at the hands of sex buyers and pimps. We also see that prostitution system is at the intersection of various inequalities and discrimination. Everywhere in the world, this system disproportionately impacts women and girls from the most discriminated communities. We're speaking about migrant women, indigenous, those from oppressed castes, those that are from poor background or from minorities. They are the prime targets of pimps and sex buyers. The prostitution system is one that feeds on multiple vulnerabilities: poverty, childhood sexual abuse, addictions. There are numerous factors of vulnerabilities that the prostitution system preys upon. Our members' organization, they have decades of field experience in supporting persons in prostitution. Some of these organizations have also been founded by survivors of prostitution themselves. And today, I'm very happy to discuss with you the best practices to support persons on prostitution on the field level. This year in August, CAP International published its first handbook entitled The Grassroots Abolitionist Approach, which summarizes and which highlights illustrations from all over the world on how grassroots organizations support persons in prostitution. So we have been giving a platform to social workers from various countries, to experts, leaders of NGOs, but also to survivors of prostitution and to women who've been benefiting from this support. What is the grassroots abolitionist approach? It is first and foremost a method that seeks to address the root causes of the prostitution system, to overcome the vulnerabilities, to answer all the needs expressed by persons in prostitution. The grassroots abolitionist approach is an approach that is implemented by abolitionist organizations on the field, and it is one that centers prostitution as a form of violence. Prostitution is a form of violence that cannot be softened, that cannot be regulated. And in this way, this approach seems to provide long-term sustainable alternatives to victims of prostitution and trafficking for sexual exploitation. What we can see is that this approach kind of contrasts with the harm reduction methodology, which is very popular among organizations, but which is also an approach that doesn't seek to bring systemic change, but rather to mitigate the risk of violence. Since as abolitionist organizations, we don't consider that prostitution can be softened, we are aiming for a more ambitious project of society, which is to eliminate the prostitution system and to expose less and less people to the harms of this system. Harm reduction is also a method that have been historically an approach set in place by organizations that promote the legalization of the prostitution system as they seek to regulate the system of prostitution behind the illusion kind of safety, of providing more rights to persons in prostitution and more control on the risk of this system. The grassroots abolitionist approach can incorporate some aspects of the risk reduction, but it is not the finality of this approach. It is a mere step to have systemic change. So the handbook that we promoted and published this summer highlights the best practices from CAP members all over the world to support persons in prostitution. And I'm very happy to share a few examples with you today, although there are a lot more in the handbook that we published. What we can say about the grassroots abolitionist approach is that it can mostly focus on two big pillars. The first one is holistic support and empowerment. And in these steps of support, NGOs seek to understand, assess all the needs expressed by the persons in prostitution that they support. Thus, they assess the needs of persons in prostitution and respond to their primary needs, such as food, hygiene, health, housing, and this in many ways. It is also an approach that centers a feminist approach. For example, one of our members, Isala, in Belgium, has developed a needs assessment that is actually rooted in feminist empowerment. This feminist empowerment helps women develop their own autonomy and decisions based on the knowledge of all the options available in the country. The woman supported is always seen as the expert in her own life, and the people supporting have a non-judgmental approach and have an unconditional support approach. Another example, more on the housing support, is that one of our members in Mongolia, which is Talita Mongolia, is operating in Ulaanbaatar, and it has 2 shelters in the forms of apartments that can host up to 10 women and girls, where they can stay up to 2 years. What Marie was mentioning earlier is that exiting prostitution is a long-term process. It is sometimes a lifelong process. So organizations on the ground seek to provide and to reduce all the vulnerabilities in the period of exiting. So providing a safe place away from prostitution, where you have support, where you can access therapy and a wide range of support services is very important. The second pillar of this approach is more on the creation of socio-economic autonomy and building exit pathways. Grassroots abolitionist organizations provide access to, for example, formal education, non-formal education, vocational training, income-generating activities, job placement to persons in prostitution. And one of the good examples that we have in the CAP coalition is that in India, one of our organizations, which is called South Kolkata Hamari Muskan, operates in the very heart of Asia's biggest red light area, which is called Sonagachi. It reinforces the access to formal education and non-formal education of children that are born in the red light area from mothers who have been or who are in prostitution. And it reinforces these accesses by providing tutorship to them, by providing a wide range of extracurricular activities, as much as therapeutic sessions, whether collective or individuals, sometimes going up to 4 times a week. And what we have seen is that this year, a group of 16 students that have been supported by South Kolkata Hamari Muskan for over a decade in all of these different areas is the first generation of their family and also the first generation of the red light area of Sonagachi to attend university. So it is a major achievement and a milestone for the organization, for the community, that these students are now going to university and they actually graduated high school with very good grades. The organization, and we were speaking about it earlier, and Marie and Pascale, you were mentioning the need to create actually exit pathways that are tailored to the needs of women in prostitution and that actually matches their expectation. And so organizations on the ground also try to match these expectations. For example, this Indian organization has created a women-led social entrepreneurship training course where women are called to develop their business skills, or just, taught to develop various skills so that they can launch and run their own business. So some of the women in prostitution who have exited and who have been supported by this organization are now managing the mobile restaurants in the red light area. Some others have learned some jewelry making skills, and they are now selling their own jewelry also outside of the red light area. So these are a few examples among many others, but I still want to touch upon some of the challenges that grassroots abolitionist organizations face. The first one, as we mentioned before, is that exiting prostitution is a complex, individualized process. It is hard. Women face many obstacles. The state is oftentimes not helping, especially in countries that are not abolitionist. And in countries that do have the equality model, there is often no political will to really implement the exit programs and for them to reach their full potential, although it is a very good social provision in the legislation. So the support is long-term, the support is sometimes lifelong. The work of grassroots and survivor-led organizations that implement this approach often lacks consideration from grant-making policies. Harm reduction approaches are much more funded than approaches that have a holistic, methodology and that seek to provide a sustainable exit from the prostitution system. What we can see, although there are many obstacles, is that this approach is effective because it radically transforms the lives of women who have been in prostitution by recognizing their power, by recognizing their resilience, and allowing them to exit out of this system. So the work of the grassroots abolitionist organization is rooted in the fight for equality, against racism, against neocolonial practices of which prostitution is a part of, and it is a work also for social justice. And what we can say, and I'll conclude on that, is that their work coupled to legislative change towards the equality model is the only way to bring about systemic change and a life free from violence for women and girls. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing with us, Héma, and congratulations to CAP International for all the work done over the last years, and for constantly reminding decision makers that we cannot and we should not put a price on human beings. Héma, I know that you have another commitment and that you cannot stay with us much longer, so we set you free now, but thanks again, and see you soon. We are now moving to panel number 2 about the trivialization of prostitution through various forms in today's era. And we start with the trivialization of prostitution in video games. Most of us are probably familiar with the video game GTA. This is a very popular video game where, among other things, killing women in prostitution is something the main character is able to do. But Anna Sander, who is behind Talita, a Swedish non-profit organization offering a way out of prostitution, thought of an alternative video game that completely turns the GTA narrative upside down. And I'm going to let Anna talk about this project called Mission Talita. Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Alexia, and thank you for inviting me to this webinar. Yes, my name is Anna Sander, and I'm one of the founders of the organization Talita. And I'm just going to make a quick introduction before I start to talk about Mission Talita. What we do is that we help women and children leave prostitution, pornography, and human trafficking and into a new life. We run safe houses for women and children with a rehabilitation program that is 2 years, 1 year in safe house and 1 more year in a transit apartment. And we have shelters with a rehab program in Sweden, in Mongolia, in the Philippines, Romania, and Kenya. And as I think you know, in Sweden, we have this law called the Nordic model or the equality model. And as you know, it says that it's it's a sex buyer that commits a crime. And it's not the woman in prostitution that should be criminalized. She is the one that needs help and support. But of course, you guys know this. But therefore, the Swedish police go after sex buyers. And we have close connection to the police. And when we talk to them, they have told us that in the past few years, the sex buyers are getting younger and younger. And we didn't know how to reach them. So what we wanted to do was to find a way to reach young men and tell them about why women end up in prostitution. And we discussed it and we realized that the best way to do this is to go where they are. We have to go to the gaming communities. That's where they hang around. And as you just heard Alexia say, there is this game called GTA that is actually the most streamed games in the world. So many young men are playing this game and it's extremely violent. And in GTA, you can go to women in prostitution and you can exploit them sexually. But you can't just do that. You can also, after you've paid them, take the money back. You can rob them from all the money that they have. You can even kill them if you want to. You cannot talk to them. That is not possible in the game, but you can murder them. And they have absolutely no way of escaping this. And given that GTA might be many young men's first exposure to prostitution and victims of sex trafficking, the risk is imminent that the game will affect their perception and attitudes towards prostitution in an extremely harmful way. And because of that, we decided to make an alternative game experience that we called Mission Talita. It's like a part of the game that they can play. They can choose to play it if they wish within the actual GTA game. And what the player can do is that they play this modified version of the game that they download, and it starts by them hearing a woman crying for help. And when he pays attention to this and starts to listen, she starts to tell her story, why she ended up in prostitution. And she tells about her background, about poverty, about, you know, all those things that we know lead into prostitution. And the player understands that she is forced into prostitution and that she is in urgent need of help. And now he has to be quick because he needs to find this young lady and rescue her. Because she is kept by pimps and traffickers in a place where he needs to go. And he has to be fast. And he has to fight the pimps in order to rescue her, and he can use helicopters, motorcycles, cars, and finally take her to Talita's safe house. And then the game is completed, and there are 4 different versions of this that they can play and meet 4 different women in prostitution. And the aim for the player is to understand that he can actually help the women instead of exploiting or hurting them. And the women that they rescue, their stories are based on women that we have met in Talita. So it's based on true stories. And the women have said themselves that they want us to use their stories because they want them to be told. So we've done this in cooperation with 4 women at Talita. By changing the narrative in the game, we give the women a new storyline while giving players insight in what Talita does and inspire them to do the same, namely help women out of prostitution. We wanted to reach young men and give them insight in what prostitution is all about. And our goal was that within 3 months, we wanted to reach 300,000 young men. That was our goal. And we were like, that is a lot, but we need, to aim high in order to reach something. And when we launched Mission Talita, it quite fast became a gaming news story. And there were so many different reactions, more reactions than we could ever dream of. And so many welcomed Mission Talita, and different gaming sites started to talk about it and advertise it. And it became clear to us that Mission Talita sparked interest within the gaming world. And young men across the globe, which Talita never have had a chance to reach, they were suddenly discussing prostitution. On one gaming forum, Mission Talita led to a debate about prostitutes, and they were actually talking about women in prostitution as human beings for the very first time. And our goal was, like I said, to reach 300,000 young men with a different view on prostitution. we managed to reach over 96 million young men within 21 different countries. And in international gaming forums, this initiative from Talita, a super small Swedish organization, was discussed, and they started to talk about the equality model and the potential exclusion of prostitution in the next version of GTA that will come in 2025. So that is what we're hoping for, that we have made an impact and that young men will start to understand that women in prostitution are there for a reason, not because they choose this. Thank you so much for giving me time to speak.
Thank you so much, Anna, for sharing about this inspiring and impactful campaign that is Mission Talita, and that is most importantly based on true stories from survivors. And congratulations on raising awareness on prostitution in this challenging field that is video games. It was definitely not an easy mission, so thank you again. So now we are going to travel to Ireland, as I am going to invite Ferga Nivrin, who is Violence Against Women Officer at the National Women's Council, to talk about the research she conducted on sexual exploitation and sexual harassment in the rental housing market. Thank you for being with us, Ferga.
Thanks so much, Alexia. I'm going to just share my screen now, if I can. I hope you can all see that, can you?
We can see it, thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, so thanks so much for the invitation to participate here today. The National Women's Council is really honoured and delighted to be part of this important event. We also want to thank the European Women's Lobby for the grant that partially funded this research, which we believe is the first of its kind in Europe. It examines sex for rent exploitation, which, like prostitution, seeks to leverage a power imbalance, in this case, between those with secure housing and those who are homeless or in housing precarity. So what is sex for rent exploitation? I'll be using that abbreviation there, SFR, throughout the presentation. Sex for rent is a particularly gendered form of landlord-renter exploitation, where accommodation is offered at a discount or completely rent-free in return for sexual services from the renter. The predators are overwhelmingly men, and those targeted are predominantly women, although there is some evidence of young men also being preyed upon by male predators, but to a lesser extent, it seems. So what is the issue? As it stands, there is no legal obstacle to prevent a landlord renting out a room in their home on condition that the tenant is sexually available to them. There is no law against asking a woman desperate for a home because she is fleeing domestic violence, for example, to present or behave in a certain way in order to rent a place to live. And there is no system to protect women from eviction if they report these issues, and there is nowhere to report them because proposing or enforcing these arrangements is not a crime as it stands in Ireland. As a result, there are some women in insecure housing in Ireland today who are being forced to make a choice between sexual exploitation and homelessness. This does not affect all women equally. Some cohorts are more vulnerable to this kind of exploitation. These include women on very low incomes, migrants, women in prostitution, women fleeing domestic violence, and women seeking to leave direct provision accommodation. Sorry, I'm just having difficulty. There we go. So the methodology for the research that we are discussing today was exploratory with a mixed methods approach, and it encompassed 4 strands, really. There was a literature review, interviews with key experts, a review on legislation on sex for rent in selected jurisdictions, monitoring of specific user-to-user online platforms for a period of 1 month in late 2023 to identify the nature and content of selected sex for rent advertisements. So what is the current Irish legal position with sex for rent? It is not currently a crime in Ireland, but there is a lack of clarity and information on this amongst the public. There has been some speculation that convictions could be sought under current legislation in 2 separate areas. The first is in relation to sexual offences. We have strong rape law, which stipulates that consent must be freely and voluntarily given. In the case of sex for rent, where consent is given only in the absence of any other viable means of finding housing, it is debatable at best if it would meet the criteria of being free and voluntary. Secondly, it has been suggested that law criminalising the purchase of sex might be an avenue through which offending landlords could be prosecuted, because Ireland is an equality model country, and so the purchase of sex is illegal here. Sex for rent is essentially sex purchase, but it uses shelter as currency instead of euro. However, technical issues make it impossible to prosecute in the case of sex for rent because no money changes hands and proof of purchase is required to prosecute such cases. Additionally, the law specifies that the victim, in this case the renter, would have to identify as a prostitute in order to prosecute a case successfully. And obviously this would deter victims. In practice, the reaction of the police has been to say it is a civil matter, so it can't be pursued. The social context in which sex for rent occurs. In Ireland, as in many countries across Europe, we are in a severe and deepening housing crisis. We have record numbers of homeless people. We are seeing an increasing feminisation of housing precarity in Ireland. As a matter of fact, homelessness amongst women has risen by 49% over the last 2 years. And these official statistics don't reflect the full picture. For example, women currently in domestic violence refuges in Ireland are not considered homeless because they are housed in refuges. We have seen a huge rise in family homelessness. Again, I understand this is happening across Europe. It is very gendered. The vast majority of these are headed by a woman who's a lone parent. And when we consider the wider context of an epidemic of domestic, sexual and gender-based violence, combined with this housing crisis, unfortunately, this kind of exploitation, while shocking, is not surprising. As a matter of fact, it's almost inevitable when you think of the gendered and the context that we live in. Sex for rent exploitation appears to occur primarily where tenants are renting a room within a dwelling as opposed to renting own-door accommodation. In this way, renters end up sharing a premises with a predatory landlord who has far greater ease of access to the victim or tenant. This is a layer of the rental tenure in Ireland that is completely unregulated and private, and legally such renters are known as licensees as opposed to tenants, and they have virtually no rights in relation to their home. This is key to understanding how sex for rent exploitation works. The mechanism of the sex for rent proposal. The landlord can make a sex for rent proposal in a variety of ways, including advertising for such arrangements on user-to-user online platforms, responding via private message to a post on Facebook or any other social media platform from someone seeking accommodation. And we have to remember that these kinds of direct messages that the landlords send in response to posts are not visible to the public. Therefore, they're harder to filter out, particularly as Meta moves to end-to-end encryption. Landlords can make an in-person offer to a prospective tenant who's visiting a property to assess its suitability for rental, or they can actually make the proposal to somebody who's an in situ or an existing tenant in a property. It must be remembered that the proposal of these arrangements is problematic in itself, even if the renter doesn't agree to the arrangement. If a suggestion of this nature were to be made in a work context for example, to any employee, it would be considered sexual harassment. And if reported, the perpetrator would be subject to sanctions from the employer, who is legally required to deal with it effectively or face penalties under laws designed to protect women from gender discrimination in the workplace. However, where the proposals are made in a housing context, there are no obvious and supported steps to take. It is also the case, particularly for those in licensee arrangements with few protections, that a victim making any complaint of this nature about a landlord would almost certainly face eviction. The only option for the renter here is to seek another place to live and move out when possible, leaving the landlord the possibility of becoming a serial sexual harasser with absolute impunity. For this reason, sexual harassment of this kind in person, particularly with regard to in situ tenants, is deeply damaging and problematic. In the work context, this harassment is understood to create a hostile environment for the victim. In the sex for rent situation, this transfers the hostile environment to the place that is supposed to be their safe haven, their home. Characteristics of sex for rent ads. Generally speaking, there is an absence of photographs of the property. There'd be no advertised rental price or the setting of a nominal fee or a declaration that the rental price is negotiable. There's no exact location given of the advertised property. And generally speaking, they target a particular type of renter, mostly female and frequently referring to a preferred demeanor. They include a request for a photograph or a physical description of the kind of woman desired. And here is just one example of a sex for rent ad taken from the National Women's Council report that shows some of these characteristics. As you can see, there's no address given. We're simply told that the room is available to rent in Naas, which is a town in County Kildare, small enough town. There's very nominal rent proposed, €1. The landlord, though, is quite clear on the kind of tenant he wants. He wants somebody who is fit, and the demeanor required is that they be submissive. He also wants the tenant to be able to trade in return for lodgings. I just want to note as well that sex for rent is now a genre of porn. When I was searching for sex for rent ads as part of the research project, I was getting quite a few of these Pornhub ads in my Google feed, indicating that there are thousands of sex for rent porn videos available on Pornhub. So that is a new genre of porn that has been created as a direct result of sex for rent exploitation. The report makes several recommendations. These are the primary ones here. The first is that we suggest that engaging as a landlord in sex for rent arrangements should be made a specific named offence. That would comply with fair labelling principles in law, so there'd be no doubt on the part of the landlord that it is a crime. We also say that making or proposing these arrangements, even if they are not agreed to, should also be a specific named offence, because it is a really problematic form of sexual harassment, particularly when it takes place inside a woman's home and it creates a hostile environment for her within that home. We call for the extension of tenants' rights to those in licensee arrangements, And finally, we ask that sex for rent ads come under the remit of the Online Safety Commissioner. I just want to thank you very much for your attention and interest in this report, and really just to remind you that we have just dipped our toes into the research here today. The full report is available to download at on our website there, www.nwci.ie. And please, I'd welcome any questions or comments. That's my email address there. The National Women's Council are really eager to continue this research and extend it. So we're really interested in hearing from any person or organization who's similarly interested. I'll just stop sharing my screen now. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much to you, Ferga. Congratulations on the research, and thank you for conducting this research, because we need data. Usually this is what we miss a lot, and we really need this data to convince decision makers that they definitely need to act. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Now we move to France. We will go to Alissa Arabare, legal expert, feminist activist, advocacy lead of the European Network of Migrant Women, and president of the French Coordination for the European Women's Lobby. She will talk about the impact of pornography and its links to prostitution. Thank you for being here, Alissa. The floor is yours.
Hi, Alexia. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation. So as Alexia mentioned, I'm the president of the French Coordination for the European Women's Lobby. And in France, several women's rights organizations have been mobilizing against the pornography industry for several years now. And we're highlighting the links between this industry and prostitution. In France, we have an abolitionist law since 2016. And we want to push for pornography to be recognized as a filmed form of prostitution because of its numerous links with prostitution, both in terms of recruiting victims, grooming methods, consequences on the lives of the victims, and the pimps and traffickers profiting from vulnerable women. So before we go in depth into the legal cases in France, I wanted to give a little overview of what is the pornography industry today, and also historically. So in the 50s, pornography was born with the first edition of Playboy, and this was developed further in the 70s, especially in New York, where the mafia and the pimps started organizing what is called peep shows. So basically, it was prostituted women who were engaging in sexual acts with buyers, and other buyers were able to watch the rape of the prostituted woman through little holes in the wall or through camera systems. And so this highlights that from the very beginning, the idea of pornography was very linked with prostitution and the sexual exploitation of women. Then we saw an escalation of the content, with several magazines creating competition between themselves, between Penthouse, Hustler, and Playboy. There was a race to more and more extreme content in order to differentiate themselves. And then in the 2000s, there was the explosion of pornography with the internet and what is called the 3 A's, anonymous, affordable, accessible. So basically, we had all of this content online that was free, that was very easily accessible, and also that you could watch without going to a DVD store and having the embarrassment, let's say, of renting a pornography video. So this, of course, created an explosion of the consumption of pornography. Today, pornography is 1/3 of the internet content, and of course, it's a multi-billion global industry with every second over $3,000 being spent on pornography. So the economic model is based, like YouTube or the streaming platforms, on clicks, sorry, and views. So basically, content producers earn 15 cents for about 1,000 views on the video. So this also leads to a race for clicks to make more money, and so more and more extreme content, shocking content, things that are going to produce, to generate some interaction. In France, we often say that pornography is the school and the legitimation of violence against women and girls. We have now two very important reports, one from the French Senate and one more recent dated September 2023 from the High Council of Equality Between Women and Men, that highlights the violence contained in a pornography platform, and especially this number quoted on the High Council of Equality report, that's 90% of pornographic video viewed online contain scenes of violence against women. And there are studies highlighting that in the majority of such videos, women respond to violence with pleasure, leading to the idea that women like to be degraded in sexuality, and leading to a confusion between sexuality and violence that obviously has an impact in the building of sexual models in the society, and especially with viewers being younger and younger. A young Arab girl for perverted men, pretty girl raped by monster, crying torture painful porn videos, or prison camp Nazi video porno. This is some of the actual titles that can be found in pornography videos. And the previous speakers highlighted the fact that sex for rent is it's trending now and is becoming a pornography tag, pornography section. It is the case for all of the issues in society. Basically, racism is very present on pornography platform, with women being categorized based on their ethnicity, their skin color. You have also incest that is very present on this platform, with categories such as father, stepfather, raping daughter, etc. Also pedocriminality as a whole, with the teen category being extremely popular on the major platform, the schoolgirl category as well. And basically, pornography takes the worst forms of violence in history, such as slavery, the Holocaust, and basically creates this erotization of violence. There is also a lot of humiliation of veiled women, reminding of colonial violence, with beurette, which is a French slur meaning Arab women, being also one of the top research on French pornography website. The UN estimates that child pornography generates between 3 and 20 billion a year worldwide. And so there is a normalization of child pornography or child sexual abuse materials on mainstream platforms. And this is linked, of course, with pedocriminality in so-called real life. I say so-called because, very importantly, pornography videos are not fake life. It's not cinema. It's actual violence being filmed and being posted online. However, if we speak in face-to-face, in 2009, the Human Rights Council revealed that 92% of convicted pedocriminals possess child pornography. So it also highlights the relationship between child pornography consumption and actual acts of pedocriminality. So there is now new types of violence against women and girls emerging, image-based sexual abuse, what is usually called revenge porn, so the sharing of intimate pictures or videos without consent, deep fakes, so it's the use of artificial intelligences to design sexualized, humiliating images of women, often as a means of silenciation online. There is also rape by webcam, and sexual harassment online, and so on. And so these types of violence are also very linked with pornography, with a lot of image-based sexual abuse material being found on pornography platform, because there is close to no control over where the images come from, and are the women and men on the videos actually so-called actors or actual victims of violence, or are they even aware that the videos are published? And once these videos are online, it is almost impossible for the victims to take them away. In France, as I said, we have 2 ongoing legal proceedings. One, the investigation is not finished yet, but for the French Bukake case, which involves 50 women civil party, the investigation is over, and the trial will take place normally in 2025. And I am member of Oser le Féminisme, which is a member organization of the French Coordination for the European Women's Lobby. The Oser le Féminisme gives support to the victims of the plaintiffs of this trial, and we've been trying for 4 years to take away the videos from the internet. It's not going away, and the victims face ongoing victimization because of blackmail that they go through, because of the fear that their close ones, their fathers, husbands, or employers will find the videos, or also because they are harassed, they are recognized and harassed in the streets, and they describe this as a social death. And I was saying that the new emerging forms of violence are very linked with pornography, and this is also true with the fact that some of these violence are really normalized through pornography platforms. So, for instance, there are entire websites dedicated to women being raped by taxi drivers. There are categories in the pornography platforms of upskirting, which is the phenomenon of taking a picture under the skirts of women, which occurs more and more in, for instance, public transportation. And we see also an increase of sexual violence among minors, with, for instance, a 52% of perpetrators of sexual violence against children in England and Wales that are now minors. So it's more than half. Usually in the past, the people raping minors were adults, and now we see an increase of boys raping girls, and including collective rapes. There is another study in France published by IFOP, which is a big survey institute in France, which has asked some questions to the general population about rape culture, whether or not the people interrogated believed in some sentences directly linked with rape culture. And we saw a very big difference between the response of women and men, first of all, but also between men and men who watched porn since the age of 11. And if I give you an example, if we take the sentence, when you want to have a relationship with them, many women say no, but that actually means yes. Women believe this only at 9%. 16% of men believe this is true. And when we go to men who watch pornography since 11 years old, it jumps to 45% of them who believes this is true. Highlighting this is just one example, and there are a lot of them really showing the relationship between consumption of pornography since a young age and the image that you have of sexuality and relationships between women and men. So pornography is also linked with human trafficking, where women and children are recruited, transported, supplied, and obtained for sexual acts using various forms of coercion, including deception, abduction, abuse of authority, or exploitation of vulnerability, resulting in exorbitant financial profit for pornography traffickers. So this corresponds to the Palermo Protocol definition of trafficking. And we have the big example of the Zona Divas escort service that was prosecuted for trafficking at least 2,000 women from South America, from different countries in South America. And these women were trafficked and then sequestrated and filmed having doing sexual acts. And then they were threatened that the videos will be sent to their families and so on, or that they would do the same to their sisters to force them to stay and to record more. And we see also in pornography the targeting of vulnerable victims. So this is very similar as what we see in prostitution. So we have seen after the war on Ukraine started that a Ukrainian girl was trending on pornography sites. It became a top search, which also was linked with the increased trafficking risks for these women and girls that were displaced. And Europol documented this targeting of Ukrainian women and girls for sexual exploitation. So the myth about pornography, I mentioned that pornography is not cinema. This is particularly important because, again, a lot of the pornography content is actual sexual violence being filmed. We have seen this with the Pornhub case in the US, where pedocriminal videos were uploaded and watched by consumers on these websites. We have seen this also in the Global South, where women are raped, sometimes collectively raped, and the videos are shared, sold for a few, for instance, in India, for a few rupees on WhatsApp groups. And then these videos also end up on mainstream pornography platforms. And we have seen this in France through the cases that I will describe the facts. But just to finish on the myth, pornography is also not freedom of expression. This is something that comes back a lot, and it's also included in the new Violence Against Women Directive by the EU that tackles a few forms of online violence against women and girls, including the sharing of intimate pictures without consent, but it highlights that this is criminalized only within the limits of the freedom of expression, putting in balance the so-called freedom of expression with the protection of women and children online, which is a big issue. The regulation of pornography is also not against private life, which is another very big counter-argument that we hear. Today in the EU, there are discussions around regulation of child sexual abuse material. We know that 62% of such material is hosted in Europe. So it's a big issue. However, there are important organizations, networks, lobbies that are fighting against the regulation of such materials in the name of the respect to private life. And finally, pornography is not sexuality education, which is also one of the big things that we hear, that especially for LGBTQIA people or for racialized people, this would be a way to see different sexualities and to explore, because there is not many alternatives, especially depending where you are from. This is not the case, as the majority of the content on pornography platform is really male-centric and centered around the staging of the humiliation and the degradation of women. So it's basically one model of sexuality that is very heteronormative. And the aim of pornographers is to make money. So with a huge number of clicks, and to do so, they are not aiming for pedagogical material or very inclusive material, etc. They are aiming, like I said, for more and more extreme content. I'm too long?
If you can start to conclude, please.
Yes, okay. So I will just say a few words about the fact of the French cases. It started in 2020. 17 producers and actors went to provisional detention with charges such as aggravated rape, aggravated procuring, and trafficking in human being. And this uncovered a terrible reality with 500 men that were identified in the investigation, everyday men who consumed pornography. They were invited to film bukkake scenes with a large number of hooded men that take turn raping a woman in the mouth and in the vagina until she chokes, and then they all ejaculate on her. and she's put it on the pallet like a merchandise. And some of the women were penetrated more than 80 times in less than 2 hours in these scenes. There was a huge orchestrated strategy to trap women with fake profiles, and women being identified and groomed online, tricked into going to a certain place, then sequestrated and sexually assaulted. Some of them were fed dog food, insulted, humiliated. So for us as feminist organizations, it goes beyond issue of sexual violence or sexual exploitation, and we are pushing for the charge of torture to be included in the trial. So I will stop there. I just want to say that no liberty is absolute. The inherent dignity of the human person and the protection against all form of objectification should be. So we should really consider pornography and the fight against the pornography industry when we speak about these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alisa, for these difficult but necessary reminders and for underlying the continuum of violence between pornography, prostitution, child sexual abuse. Now we have the pleasure to head towards the end of the webinar with MEP Lina Galvez Munoz, who was not only re-elected to the European Parliament, but with the new legislature, she became the chair of the FAM committee, and we cannot hide our joy about this, as this is great to have such an abolitionist ally at the head of this committee. MEP Galvez Munoz, thank you for being with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Greetings from Strasbourg. We are in a moment ready to start our plenary session here on Strasbourg. But for me, it is really very important, as you know, to participate in this seminar because, as you say, I'm a convinced abolitionist. I fight for it, and also have been studying all my life. I'm a university professor, also the preconditions that bring people to prostitution, and how prostitution at the end is also a school of inequality, how it should be abolished. But I would like just also to mention to the one of you that are not aware of, in the last term, we passed a non-legislative initiative report here in Parliament on prostitution. The rapporteur was my colleague from the S&D from Germany, Maria Neuch, and we managed to include sort of kind of the Nordic model in the report, and it passed. So whatever saying that there is the European Parliament has not a clear position on prostitution, and that there are different positions. Yes, there are different positions as in every single topic, but we managed to pass this report with backing the Nordic model, based basically, as you all know, in three main areas. The first one being prevention. The person who was speaking before me, sorry, I came late, so I couldn't see her name. Sorry about that, but otherwise I would have named her by her name. Was talking about pornography, and pornography is becoming more and more a way, or the main way, to kind of sexuality education. So we insisted on the prevention part of this INI report, that a lot of efforts should be put on prevention, especially linked to sexual education that should be provided at the school level. And obviously, it should not be male-dominated, and it should account with a feminist view. But also in prevention, we included aspects related to combat female poverty, and also to have better and less discriminated labor markets, because sometimes the way obviously for women to get into prostitution is because of poverty. And of course, we passed as well a directive. This one was a directive on trafficking. And obviously, you know very well the huge part or the biggest amount of trafficking of people it is for women, and girls, for sexual purposes. So on prevention, it was all that. Then another important aspect of this report was on demand, on reducing demand, because we know very well that there is prostitution, male, because there is demand, because there are mainly men asking for this prostitution, for this domination, for this exploitation, and they have to be powerful with women. So it was very clear in this report that the force behind prostitution was mainly demand, was demand driven. And the third big part of this report, or this sorry, I'm not well, is exit strategies that obviously are very important, both in terms of reintegration, social reintegration, but also in terms of labor integration. So this was the three main aspects of this legislation: prevention, demand, or really to reduce demand, and finally exit strategies. We think, or I think especially, this resolution is a very important step forward, though, as I was insisting before, a lot of people insist that we don't have a clear view on that. This is not true. It is very clear. I invite you to read it and to really examine it and to study it, because it's very important. It was very clear as well that this is the part I have worked probably the most, that prostitution is not a free choice. It is not at all, because what is free choice? I mean, in order to have free choice, you need to have a kind of material preconditions. And normally, most of people entering prostitution is because they don't have more choices, no real choices. Second, you really need to have a socialization that prevents of being certain aspects or certain exits as normal. And also, obviously, our choices are adaptive. So we really take our choices in relation to our real opportunities. So to explain how women get into prostitution through free choice, or just this distinction between forced prostitution and free choice, I think for me it is not very realistic, and it is just hiding a huge sex industry and a great business, and also this privilege or this power, especially men could exercise through women, through prostitution. Because another thing that I think is very important too is that prostitution, we are not talking only about exploitation. We are not talking also about power inequalities, and we are not only talking about commodification. We are talking about school of inequality. And this is very important because, again, this is also teaching current generations, but especially new generations, boys and girls, but especially boys, that we are not equal, that through money they could have the woman they want or the girl they want. So this is a school of inequality that obviously we really need to change, and also to fight against against any normalization of different sort of prostitutions, like sugar daddyism, or even some attitudes or cultural aspect that could bring people to be closer to prostitution, or to normalize prostitution as hypersexualization or the objectivization of women. So I cannot really stay much longer, but just please count on me on wherever initiative you want to develop in this sense. I hope every day will be the day of non-prostitution. We have to be also very clear with statistics and with numbers. I mean, the regulation that some countries has passed under the excuse that this is another normal job, is not reducing prostitution, it's not reducing demand, quite the other way around. So, so it is important that we put clear numbers, and that we also find we advance on education, on prevention, on combating women's poverty, combating trafficking, but also on combating providing exit alternative for women that want to quit prostitution. So we really need to move to a fairer and more equal society. Unless we abolish prostitution, that is not possible. There is no possible to have an equal society if we still have prostitution, and prostitution is still sort of considered normal, or a normal job, or whatever, because, as I say, it's not all the exploitation, which it is. It is not only commodification, it's not only cosification, objectivization, and it is also a school of inequality. And I think we really, if we are fighting for an equal Europe, we really need to fight for abolish prostitution here and everywhere, obviously. But as far as our competences lie in Europe, I think we really need to continue fighting against a great lobby, and against privileges, and against really false narrative on regarding this free choice that is not a real free choice. So thank you very much, and please count with me. I would like to say also with the whole FAN committee, but things are changing here very much in Parliament, and who knows. But what we have is what we have, and we have this initiative report. The rapporteur was Mariano. I would like to thank her, because she really worked very hard for that. And this is our position, our official position. As far as we don't have another one, it is this one. So please tell everyone that we have this position, and that we will keep fighting to abolish prostitution. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much, MEP Galvez Munoz. Thank you for taking the time to be here despite your busy agenda and despite your sickness. So we hope you get well soon, but mostly we want to thank you sincerely to being such an ally to fight against the school of inequalities. So we will be by your side for an abolitionist Europe. Get well soon, and thank you very much. So yeah, we are heading towards the end of the webinar. I saw that actually we may not need a Q&A moment, because my wonderful colleagues already answered to most of the questions, and so did some of the guests who did very well, as they saw that they had questions in the chat and they answered directly. I just saw maybe one question where we were asked to send the report of the European Parliament, so I can do so to the person who asked it, while I will give the floor to our Secretary General, Mary Collins. She will close this webinar. And in the meantime, I thank you again all for coming today. and for being together with us in this abolitionist combat and for a better world for survivors of prostitution. Mary, the floor is yours.
Thank you and good afternoon, everybody. Really would like to thank each and every one of you. This has been an extraordinarily rich exchange. And I want to say a special thanks to Pascale and Marie for sharing your experiences. Your voices are so crucial. Real life experiences must shape the way forward. And as highlighted by CAP, we really need to ensure that the dignity of survivors must be at the core of any action we take forward. I just want to reassure you that the European Women's Lobby is committed to making Europe free from prostitution. And it has been one of our priorities for almost 30 years. We saw today and we heard today different dimensions. We heard about the hidden dimension through housing and through rental policies. We also heard about alternative perspectives and particularly changing the narrative in terms of gaming, which I think is a really interesting model, and that we should be also looking at that and gaining some expertise from that as well. And also obviously the link with pornography. I think for us, it's always been very clear that that is a very tight link that we need to also break. So it shows as well that we need a holistic approach to violence against women. Prostitution is a form of violence against women. And we need to be pushing for more meaningful exit strategies, particularly based on the testimonies that Pascale and Marie gave earlier on. But as was just said by the chair of the FEM committee, a holistic approach to gender equality. Prostitution is not a real choice, particularly in a world where gender inequalities persist. So we have to tackle privileges, power, and money, and they are usually allocated to men. So that is really the part of a patriarchal society. We need to ensure that these issues are tackled direct. Thanks to all of your actions and our actions, and also with the Brussels call, I think we've had a relatively good year insofar as that we have made a step in the right direction. We never imagined that the resolution in the European Parliament would actually be adopted, and it was. And I'd like to really congratulate every single one of you for all of the efforts and for coming together and for really pushing this forward. We also saw that the Reem Al-Salam's report as well from the UN. Again, I think it's another report that strengthens our voice. And we saw recently that the Ben, if I'm spelling it correctly, Chika report has been withdrawn. So there are moments of hope, let me put it that way. And I think we have the basis for an action plan to move forward. So together with the Brussels call, we will certainly work together in this new EU mandate, which will be very challenging. But I am so delighted to have our chair of the FEM committee on our side. I think everything she said, we can only fully agree with her. So I think that gives us a beacon of hope. And we all need to stick together, stand together, be strong, and be united. So I look very much forward to working with you all and continuing our work in the coming months and years ahead. So I think together we will be stronger. And I think together we have the possibilities to make sure that what's in place for the moment, we can actually build on and move forward. And we have, as I say, the backing of the chair in the FEM committee, who said very strongly that there is a clear mandate for the EU, and that the position of the European Parliament certainly is very clear. So we cannot contest that. And we need to move towards a world where gender equality becomes a reality for every single woman and girl, on our continent, but also worldwide as well. So with that, I would like to thank you most sincerely, again, for a very inspiring webinar. I think we also need to have more dialogue and exchange, and so that we can also continue to support each other in every single capacity where we are. So once again, thank you, and thank you, Alexia, for organizing this. And I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mary. And have a wonderful evening, everyone, full of hope and inspiration for the future. Thank you.
Bye-bye.